400 planes vanished. An entire air force, gone. In a single day. Most people know about Pearl Harbor, but almost no one knows about the day America annihilated Japan's air arm in hours. Today, we're not just telling you a story, we're taking you back to a moment that rewrote history, a clash so one-sided it earned a nickname that would haunt an empire, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Pacific sky was still dark. A faint line of orange light bled across the horizon, and beneath it, a sleeping giant prepared for war. Task Force 58. 15 carriers, nearly 1,000 aircraft, a tidal wave of American steel ready to unleash its fury. Engines rumbled like caged beasts, men moved like shadows in the pre-dawn haze, every breath carrying the smell of fuel oil and salt water. On that morning, June 19, 1944, the Pacific Ocean was about to become a graveyard. In the midst of that controlled chaos was Lieutenant Commander David Harrington. He strapped himself into a machine unlike any he had ever flown before, the F6F Hellcat. A fighter born from lessons written in blood, forged to crush the myth of Japanese air superiority. As he ran his hand along the armored frame, he felt the weight of its purpose. 6.50 caliber machine guns were nested in its wings, and a 2,000 horsepower Pratt Whitney engine growled to life. This wasn't just a plane, it was America's answer to the Zero, and it was hungry. Beyond the carriers, the sea stretched endless and calm, but the stillness was a lie. Intelligence had warned them, the Japanese would come in force. Hundreds of aircraft, perhaps the largest strike of the Pacific War, were gathering somewhere beyond that horizon. The enemy was convinced they could break the American fleet. They had no idea that in just a few hours, the balance of air power would tilt forever. The invincible Zero, once the terror of Pearl Harbor and the Coral Sea, was about to meet its reckoning. And in the skies above the Marianas, the Hellcat would write its legend. Only 3 years earlier, the story had been very different. In December 1941, Japanese aircraft had ripped across the skies of Pearl Harbor. The Zero, sleek, fast, and impossibly agile, seemed untouchable. It outturned every American plane, outran them, climbed faster, and struck harder. American pilots called it a phantom, a machine that defied the rules of air combat. At Wake Island, in the Philippines, and over the Coral Sea, the Zero carved its legend in fire. For young aviators like David Harrington, those early years were brutal. He remembered his first tour flying the stubby, underpowered Wildcat. It could fight, but only barely. Against the Zero, every maneuver felt like suicide. You couldn't climb with it, you couldn't turn with it, the only chance was to dive, fire, and pray you escaped. American losses mounted, not just in machines but in men. Pilots with only weeks of combat experience were thrown into the sky, and the Zero devoured them. The lesson was clear: if America wanted to survive in the Pacific, it needed more than courage, it needed a weapon. By mid-1942, engineers at Grumman Aircraft began sketching a new answer. They listened to combat reports from pilots who had fought and barely survived the Zero. Every weakness was noted, every strength studied. The design philosophy was stark: forget outturning the Zero, forget lightweight frames. The new fighter would not be a dancer, it would be a brawler. Thus, the Hellcat was born. It was a machine built like a flying fortress, armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and 6 heavy machine guns. It was not delicate, it was not subtle, it was survival on wings. By late 1943, the first Hellcats reached the fleet. Pilots like Harrington knew instantly this was different. The Wildcat had felt like a compromise, the Hellcat felt like destiny. It climbed with power, dove like a hawk, and could take punishment and keep flying when a Zero would already be a fireball. And most importantly, it was simple to fly, so simple that even a fresh graduate from flight school could handle it. But machines alone don't win wars. Behind every Hellcat was something greater: the relentless engine of American industry. While Japan struggled to replace even a few dozen planes each month, U.S. factories were building thousands. While Japanese flight schools cut training hours, American cadets graduated with over 300 hours in the cockpit. The math was merciless. And so, by 1944, the balance had shifted. for the first time, the Zero was no longer the hunter, it was the hunted. The stage was set in the Marianas, tiny islands scattered in the Pacific but priceless in strategic value. Whoever controlled them would hold the key to striking Japan itself. On one side, Admiral Raymond Spruance and Admiral Mark Mitcher assembled the might of Task Force 58, 15 carriers, hundreds of ships, and nearly 1,000 aircraft, most of them Hellcats. On the other side, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa prepared his counterstroke, 9 carriers and every pilot Japan could scrape together. Veterans, yes, but also boys barely out of training, some with less than 50 hours of flight time. The difference was stark. One side fought with experience, numbers, and machines built to dominate. The other fought with dwindling hope, fragile aircraft, and a myth that was already fading. Harrington walked the deck on the night of June 18. The air smelled of gasoline and salt spray. He looked at his Hellcat, tail number 29, and felt a quiet certainty. This was not 1942 anymore. This was a new war, and by sunrise, the Zero's reign would end. The dawn of June 19, 1944, came with a strange electricity, not fear, not dread, but something else. Like the air itself knew history was about to shift. Aboard the carrier USS Independence, Lieutenant Commander David Harrington tightened the straps of his flight gear. The deck was alive with motion, mechanics shouting, handlers pushing fighters into position, ordnance crews hauling belts of ammunition. Every man knew this day would decide the Pacific. At the center of it all stood Captain Walter Green, commander of Air Group 22. Green was a veteran of Midway, a man who had seen friends die in burning Wildcats. His face was weathered, his voice gravel, but his eyes were sharp, alive with a quiet fury. "Gentlemen," he said, pointing at the tactical board, "today is the reckoning. The Japanese will throw everything at us. You will throw it back, hard." Beside Harrington stood his wingman, Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz, barely 20, with dark hair and a quick grin. "Think they'll come at us all at once?" Ortiz asked. Harrington gave a half smile. "If they're smart. But smart doesn't win wars anymore. Mass does." And mass was what Task Force 58 had in terrifying abundance: 15 fast carriers, 7 battleships, 8 heavy cruisers, dozens of destroyers, and nearly 900 aircraft. Radar screens glowed in the Combat Information Center. Reports streamed in, contacts, dozens, then scores, then hundreds, a tidal wave of enemy aircraft rising from the west. Back on the Independence, Harrington mounted the wing of his Hellcat. Tail number 29 gleamed in the early sun. He ran his hand across the riveted skin. This fighter had already saved his life twice. Unlike the Zero, it could take hits and keep flying. Unlike the Zero, it was built not just to kill, but to survive. The deck beneath him trembled as engines roared to life. The first squadron thundered down the catapult, claws of steel leaping into the Pacific sky. More followed, one after another, until the air above the task force filled with dark specks climbing toward the light. The order came at 8:30 a.m., launch all fighters. The deck crew moved with a precision born of endless drills. Hellcats were dragged into position, wings locked, fuel lines detached. The catapult officer raised his hand. One by one, the blue giants roared forward, wheels leaving steel, rising into the Pacific sky. Lieutenant Commander David Harrington felt the jolt as the catapult flung him forward, then a sudden freedom. The Hellcat leapt into the dawn, its 2,000 horsepower engine pulling him upward with effortless power. Below, the USS Independence shrank into a dot of steel. Above, only sky limitless, waiting. His wingman, Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz, slid into formation on his right. "Stay tight," Harrington called. Ortiz's voice came back, sharp, steady, always. At 15,000 feet, the first reports crackled over the radio, multiple bogies bearing 270. Estimate 80, altitude unknown. Captain Walter Green's voice broke in, "All units, intercept. Do not let them through." The horizon began to darken. Shapes appeared, first faint, then countless of black clouds stretching across the sky. Zeros, dive bombers, torpedo planes all heading straight for Task Force 58. Contact, Commander Frank Dalton announced, his tone calm, measured. But every pilot could feel the tension coil tight in their chest. The first wave was coming. Harrington banked his Hellcat, positioning himself above the enemy swarm. Altitude was life. From here, he could dive like a hawk, strike hard, and pull away before the Zero could even respond. Remember your training, Dalton's voice steadied them. Boom and zoom. Hit them once, climb away. Don't dogfight. They'll try to drag you into a turn. Don't let them. The Japanese formation spread out below, sunlight glinting off silver wings painted with crimson circles. Some flew tight and disciplined, others wavered, unsure pilots fresh from rush training. Harrington could almost see their faces, boys, not men. But boys with bombs could still kill. Hammer flight, follow me, Harrington called. He pushed the throttle forward. The Hellcat roared. Gravity pulled him into a dive, the airspeed needle shooting past 350. Wind screamed against the canopy. At 1,000 yards, he locked onto a Zero. The pilot never saw him coming. Harrington squeezed the trigger. 6.50 caliber guns erupted. Tracers lit the sky like molten fire. The Zero's fragile skin tore apart. A burst into the cockpit. Flame. Smoke. Silence. The aircraft disintegrated in midair. Splash 1, Harrington called, pulling back into a climb. Ortiz's voice followed, got one Judy bomber going down. The battle erupted across 30 miles of sky. Hellcats slashed through formations, striking from above then climbing away. Zeros twisted desperately, trying to force turning fights, but the Hellcat was too fast, too strong. Ortiz found himself targeted by 2 Zeros. "Skipper, I've got trouble," he shouted. Harrington rolled hard, dropping in from above. His burst caught 1 Zero in the engine explosion, black smoke. The second broke away, but Ortiz was already climbing, safe again. Everywhere, fire bloomed in the sky. Bombers fell in flames, torpedo planes disintegrated before they could even line up a run. The ocean below churned with wreckage, burning fuel, and broken wings. For the Japanese, the attack became chaos. Pilots screamed into radios, trying to regroup, but the American defense was disciplined, relentless. One division attacked, another climbed to cover, and fresh squadrons rotated in like clockwork. Harrington spotted a lone Zero pulling into a vertical climb, aggressive, skilled. This was no green recruit. The pilot twisted sharply, forcing a duel. For a moment, Harrington felt the danger. The Zero turned tighter, circling like a blade. But Harrington remembered Dalton's words, "Don't turn, climb." He pulled back, letting the Hellcat's power drag him higher. The Zero tried to follow, but its climb faltered. That was the moment. Harrington rolled inverted, dropped into a split S, and came down behind him. A short burst of fire tore through the fuselage. The Zero became a falling comet, vanishing into the sea. "Splash another," he muttered. By 10:30, the first Japanese wave was shattered. Dozens of aircraft fell burning into the ocean. Fewer than 10 even reached the American fleet, and none survived the gauntlet of anti-aircraft fire. The radio crackled, "All units, new contacts." Larger formation inbound, estimated 120 aircraft. Harrington looked at his fuel gauge, still strong. "You ready for round 2, Skipper?" Ortiz asked, his voice tight with adrenaline. Harrington adjusted his gloves. His answer was calm, always. The second wave came like a storm. 120 Japanese aircraft fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes sweeping in a black tide across the Pacific. "Here they come," Ortiz's voice cracked. "Skipper, that's a whole damn Air Force." Harrington answered with steel, "Then let's bury it." The Hellcats dove again, 36 blue fighters slicing through the morning sun. The Japanese formation buckled on contact. Green pilots broke formation, panicking. Harrington lined up on a Val dive bomber. Its bombs were slung beneath the fuselage. One burst, and flames engulfed it. The bomb detonated midair, scattering fire across the sky. "Splash one, Val," Harrington called. Danger was everywhere. Zeros swarmed in from above. One latched onto Harrington's tail. Gunfire stitched across his wing. The Hellcat shuddered. He rolled hard, dove straight down. The Zero followed, too close, too eager. At 5,000 feet, Harrington snapped into a climbing turn. The Hellcat's powerful engine dragged him upward. The Zero tried to match him and stalled. Harrington reversed, came down like a hammer, guns blazing. The Zero erupted in fire. "Splash another," he muttered. The same story played out across the sky. Hellcats used altitude, speed, and firepower to shred the enemy. The Japanese pressed on, wave after wave. By noon, a third assault was spotted, another 80 planes. "Good God," Ortiz whispered. Harrington steadied him. "They're throwing everything. This is it. Their last strength." The Hellcats rose again. The third wave was even younger pilots, barely out of school. And yet, they came. Harrington dove on a Judy bomber, ripped its engine apart. The pilot bailed, parachute opening, drifting helplessly into the sea. Ortiz destroyed a Zero with a single, clean burst. The radio was alive with voices. "Splash one. Got another, Val. They're falling like flies." At 1:15 p.m., radar picked up a fourth wave, smaller 50 aircraft. But these were not elite squadrons. They were scraps, training planes, obsolete clads, anything that could fly. Dalton's voice cut across the channel. "Gentlemen, finish it." The fourth wave barely reached the Americans. Hellcats tore them apart with ruthless efficiency. And then, silence. Harrington leveled out at 12,000 feet, scanning the horizon. The once crowded sky was empty. No more swarms, only smoke, only wreckage. "Skipper," Ortiz's voice broke through, quieter now, "how many do you think we got?" Harrington exhaled slowly. "Too many to count," he said softly. By mid-afternoon, the tally was staggering, nearly 400 Japanese aircraft destroyed. American losses, fewer than 30. It was not just a victory, it was annihilation. Harrington looked at the smoke curling into the sky and knew this was the breaking point, the moment when the Zero, once feared, once legendary, died. The myth had burned away, and the Hellcat had claimed the sky. He brought his Hellcat back toward Task Force 58. The battle had lasted hours, but to him, it felt like a single breath held too long. He glanced at his instruments, fuel low, ammunition nearly gone, hands trembling on the stick. "Independence, this is Harrington, returning to base." The reply came back, calm, steady. "Copy, Harrington. You are cleared to land." On the flight deck, the air was electric. Pilots climbed from cockpits, some grinning, some dazed, some so exhausted they could barely walk. Ortiz staggered over, helmet tucked under his arm. "Skipper," he said, "I can't even count how many went down today." Harrington looked out toward the horizon where oil slicks glimmered. "Neither can I," he said softly, "but I know what it means." That night on the carrier's mess deck, the mood was surreal, almost celebratory. Men laughed, traded stories. But beneath the noise, there was something unspoken. Every man knew how close it had been, how easily the tide could have shifted if not for the Hellcat, if not for the training, if not for the sheer weight of American industry. Captain Walter Green addressed the squadron late that evening. "Gentlemen," he said, "today we destroyed Japanese carrier aviation. Not weakened, not bruised. Destroyed." He paused. 400 enemy aircraft nearly all gone, and we lost less than 30. The room fell silent. Numbers had a way of cutting deeper than words. The morning after, the Pacific was still. No swarms of Zeros. No black columns of smoke clawing into the sky. Only the quiet hum of carriers moving steadily west. But for history, nothing would ever be the same. On June 19, 1944, Japanese naval aviation died not with a whisper, not in retreat, but in fire, in smoke, in silence. Nearly 400 aircraft lost in a single day. Veteran pilots gone. Decades of experience gone. A force that had once terrorized the Pacific shattered forever. The Hellcat had done more than win a battle, it had ended an era. Fast, heavily armed, forgiving in the hands of a rookie, and deadly in the hands of a veteran. By war's end, it would account for more than 5,000 enemy aircraft destroyed. Its kill ratio of 19-1 remains one of the greatest in aviation history. But numbers tell only part of the story. The real legacy was what the Hellcat represented. It was not a miracle plane. What it was proof. Proof that industrial might, training, and adaptation could overcome myth. Proof that lessons written in blood at Pearl Harbor had not been wasted. Lieutenant Commander David Harrington never forgot that day. He remembered standing on the deck that evening, watching the sunset paint the Pacific in blood-red light. The Hellcats were lined up along the carrier, wings folded like silent guardians. The men around him were laughing, alive, victorious. And yet, beneath it all, a heaviness. Because Harrington knew what many did not say out loud, that those Japanese boys had fought bravely, that they had died believing they could change the tide, and that their commanders had thrown them into a hopeless battle. The legacy of the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was not just victory, it was a warning. War was no longer about the few, it was no longer about aces. It was about systems. It was about nations that could outbuild, outtrain, and outlast their enemies. And America had become that nation. From that day until the war's end, American carriers struck wherever they pleased. The Zero was gone. Its reign, its legend, its terror ended. And the Hellcat remained, a symbol of a nation that had turned the tide. A symbol of the day when the sky itself declared, the age of the Zero is over. The future belongs to the Hellcat. The past is not silent. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was more than a victory, it was the moment the sky itself was decided. But this was only one chapter. The Pacific still burned, and the war was far from over. If you found this story compelling, join us again. There are more battles, more machines, and more forgotten voices waiting to be heard. Subscribe to Warline Archives and step with us into the shadows of history, because the past is not silent. It still speaks, and we will tell its story.